state of cannabis.
This is the State of Cannabis News Digest, a roundup of this week's key developments in the cannabis industry. Our top stories.
Delaware's adult-use marijuana rollout resumes as the FBI issues a fingerprint service code following a legal amendment. Pennsylvania lawmakers are pushing a historic cannabis bill that includes expungement, equity licensing, and a state retail model. Florida has enacted new restrictions on ballot initiatives, drawing lawsuits from advocacy groups and jeopardizing efforts to legalize cannabis and expand Medicaid. Legal cannabis remains off the table in Wisconsin as Republicans strip marijuana reform from the state's biennial budget proposal.
And now here is the deeper look at the key events in the cannabis world this week.
In Alabama, a new chapter is unfolding in the state's cannabis-adjacent market. On May 6th, lawmakers passed House Bill 445, a comprehensive piece of legislation that would put the Alabama Alcoholic Beverage Control Board in charge of regulating all consumable hemp products, everything from CBD oils to Delta-8 and THC-infused edibles. The bill now sits on Governor Kay Ivey's desk, awaiting her signature. The legislation introduces major reforms. It bans smokable hemp products and synthetic cannabinoids, restricts sales to adults 21 and older, and enforces strict packaging, labeling, and testing rules. Retailers will need to obtain a license after passing background checks and pay annual fees. Products must be tested in certified labs and sold only in original, approved containers. Additionally, a 10% excise tax will be imposed on all retail hemp sales. The bill is being criticized by various local Alabama leaders, including Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin, who argue the bill threatens small businesses and cannabis reform progress, while supporters, including Representative Andy Witt, say the bill is necessary to protect consumers, particularly children, and bring order to what they call a Wild West market since the 2018 Farm Bill.
The California Governor's Administration is reporting significant progress in enforcing California's emergency ban on intoxicating hemp products. According to the latest data released on May 8th, 99.7% of licensed alcohol retailers are now in compliance with the emergency regulations introduced in September 2024. These rules were established to curb the unregulated sale of intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids, such as Delta-8 THC, often found in drinks, vapes, and edibles sold outside the state's cannabis dispensary system. The Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control has led the enforcement effort, inspecting over 11,000 businesses and removing more than 7,000 illegal products from shelves. While compliance is nearly universal among licensed retailers, critics argue the ban was rushed through an emergency process and harms medical users who depend on hemp-based products. Legal challenges from the hemp industry have so far failed, and the emergency order, extended once in March, is scheduled to expire in September of this year. These developments are poised to shift the dynamics between California's regulated cannabis industry and the broader hemp market. As access to hemp-derived THC tightens, licensed dispensaries that already meet strict safety and testing standards may see increased consumer traffic. However, unlicensed vendors and online retailers remain largely outside the scope of current enforcement, posing ongoing challenges.
Delaware is now one step closer to launching its legal adult-use cannabis market. After a delay caused by federal red tape, the FBI has granted the state a fingerprint service code needed to conduct background checks on cannabis industry applicants. The approval came just days after Governor Matt Myers signed House Bill 110 into law, a measure that specifically defines who must undergo these checks, satisfying federal compliance requirements. Acting Marijuana Commissioner Paul Hyland called the development a critical win for public safety and program integrity. While state regulators had hoped to start issuing licenses in April, the FBI's initial denial stalled the process. But with this approval, selected applicants will now undergo checks and potentially receive conditional licenses. Once licensed, businesses will have 18 months to open their doors. This move is especially welcome news for aspiring cannabis entrepreneurs, particularly those from marginalized communities who have already invested significant time and resources into the process. The newly amended law also expands the state's medical marijuana program and supports a dual licensing pathway for quicker recreational sales. A confirmation hearing for newly appointed Cannabis Commissioner Joshua Sanderlin is also scheduled this week, marking another step in building a fully operational market.
This week in Florida, the voter initiative process faces a dramatic shakeup. On May 3rd, Governor Ron DeSantis signed HB 1205 into law, a sweeping measure aimed at tightening regulations on citizen-led constitutional amendments. Among its many provisions, the law now requires a $1 million bond to launch a petition drive, bans non-Floridians and non-citizens from gathering signatures, and shortens the submission window for petitions from 30 to 10 days. Felony penalties also await anyone collecting more than 25 petitions without registering with the state. The backlash was immediate. Florida Decides Healthcare, an advocacy group working to expand Medicaid access via a 2026 amendment, filed a federal lawsuit within 48 hours, calling the law unconstitutional and a blatant suppression of voters' rights. Meanwhile, Smart and Safe Florida, the group behind last year's unsuccessful recreational marijuana measure, faces uncertainty as it attempts to relaunch for the 2026 ballot. For cannabis users, patients, and the industry at large, this development could delay any progress toward legalization in one of the country's largest and most politically contentious states. With nearly 900,000 signatures now required and many volunteers disqualified under the new rules, campaigns may need more money, time, and legal resilience to survive. Advocates warn that democracy in Florida is increasingly out of reach, not because of voter disinterest, but because of structural roadblocks now codified into law.
In a significant policy move that underscores Indiana's ongoing resistance to cannabis legalization, Governor Mike Braun signed House Bill 1390, effectively outlawing all forms of marijuana advertising within the state. Though the bill's primary focus was vehicle regulation, a last-minute provision included a blanket prohibition on promoting any product containing marijuana or listed as a Schedule I controlled substance. This action comes as Indiana is increasingly surrounded by states that have legalized recreational marijuana, such as Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio, all of whom have actively marketed to Indiana consumers. In response, Indiana lawmakers moved quickly to stem what they described as unwanted influence and public exposure to cannabis messaging. The law covers a wide range of media, including traditional billboards, digital content, social media, and geo-targeted online ads. Existing ad contracts are exempt until 2035, offering a brief reprieve to current advertisers. The law will be enforced by the Indiana Attorney General's Office, which has authority to impose escalating fines on violators, starting at $5,000 and rising to $15,000 for repeat infractions. This presents a notable risk to cannabis companies with regional ad strategies and may trigger a reshuffling of marketing plans in the Midwest cannabis market. The move is expected to further isolate Indiana from national cannabis normalization trends and may delay any progress toward medical or recreational legalization in the state. Legal experts anticipate that the advertising ban could also invite constitutional challenges on grounds of restricting commercial free speech.
In a landmark enforcement move, Michigan's Cannabis Regulatory Agency has taken unprecedented action against a cannabis business operator. Youssef Barakat, co-owner of Treehouse Club dispensaries in Big Rapids and Bay City, has been issued a lifetime ban from participating in the state's cannabis industry. The CRA's decision follows a string of serious violations uncovered during investigations throughout 2023. These include the illegal sale of cannabis to a 20-year-old undercover state police cadet, the failure to register employees, and leaving large quantities of marijuana unsecured in unsupervised retail spaces. This marks the first time the CRA has used its power to impose an involuntary lifetime exclusion, signaling a tougher regulatory environment. Previously, lifetime bans were issued only through voluntary agreements. Now, any Michigan cannabis licensee must verify they are not working with someone on the CRA's exclusion list, making Barakat's case a warning to operators statewide. The move may also spark more rigorous internal compliance policies among dispensary owners and heighten regulatory scrutiny across the industry.
Minnesota is taking a major step forward in launching its adult-use cannabis industry. On June 5th, the state's Office of Cannabis Management will conduct a series of highly anticipated license lotteries. These lotteries will determine who can operate as cannabis cultivators, manufacturers, or meso-businesses, which are businesses that are vertically integrated to grow, process, and sell cannabis. The same day, a lottery will also be held for social equity applicants seeking retail licenses. This is a significant moment for a program that's been slow to materialize. Governor Tim Walz signed legalization into law in May of 2023, and since then, the rollout has been marked by delays, administrative changes, and even legal battles. A court recently ruled that the state had erred by canceling a pre-approval lottery for social equity applicants, but the current plan gives those applicants a head start before general retail licenses are drawn later this summer. However, building the industry won't be instantaneous. State law requires cannabis to be Minnesota-grown, but current cultivation capacity is far below what's needed. Regulators estimate that the state will need up to 2 million square feet of canopy space to meet demand, while today there's only about 60,000 square feet available. This means that even with licenses issued, it may take months before businesses can begin full operations and products are readily available. The cannabis landscape in Minnesota will include not only cultivators and retailers, but also wholesalers, testing labs, delivery services, and dual-use medical operators. Additional licenses for event organizers and hemp-edible businesses are expected later in the year, as the state works to build a complete, regulated ecosystem for cannabis.
This week, the U.S. Supreme Court has declined to hear Cocroft v. Graham, a pivotal case that could have reshaped how medical marijuana businesses operate in Mississippi, and perhaps beyond. The case was brought by Clarence Cocroft, owner of True Source Medical Cannabis, the state's first Black-owned dispensary. Cocroft's family-run business, located in a low-visibility industrial park, has struggled to grow due to the state's total ban on cannabis advertising. Under Mississippi law, which legalized medical cannabis in 2022, the Department of Health holds broad authority over cannabis regulations. That authority has been used to prohibit any advertising or marketing by dispensaries, even on billboards, social media, or email. Cocroft, represented by the Institute for Justice, argued this violated his First Amendment rights to speak truthfully about a legal product. The courts disagreed, pointing to marijuana's status as a federally illegal substance. The Fifth Circuit ruled that the state could restrict commercial speech about an unlawful transaction, and the Supreme Court has now refused to reconsider that interpretation. The decision leaves dispensaries in Mississippi unable to market themselves, as a major hurdle for businesses in a competitive but opaque market. It also raises concerns for medical cannabis patients who may struggle to access reliable information. The ruling may discourage investment and entrepreneurship in the state's cannabis sector, particularly among minority-owned startups, unless future legislative reforms or judicial shifts provide a clearer path forward.
In Nebraska, the future of medical marijuana remains uncertain, even after voters approved it in a landslide last November. This week, Attorney General Mike Hilgers, joined by 15 sheriffs and law enforcement leaders, pushed back against a bill in the legislature, LB 677 and Amendment AM 1251, that would set up a legal framework for medical cannabis distribution. The AG says the bill could supercharge the black market and blurs the line between medicinal and recreational use. He points to loopholes in enforcement and a lack of medical oversight, while also expressing concern about THC vaping and school proximity. However, lawmakers like Senators Ben Hansen and John Kavanaugh insist the bill is narrowly tailored to help patients with qualifying conditions, and that failing to regulate would hurt the very people voters intended to help. They argue that blocking the bill won't stop families from seeking treatment, legally or otherwise, and could leave the new Cannabis Commission without guidance or funds. Medical marijuana advocates say opposition efforts contradict the will of the voters and delay crucial access to regulated treatment options. The legislature faces a June 9th deadline to pass the bill. If it fails, the Nebraska Medical Cannabis Commission must implement regulations on its own by July 1st.
In Pennsylvania, the push to legalize adult use cannabis just took a major step forward. House Bill 1200, introduced by Representatives Rick Krajewski and Dan Frankel, was approved this week by the House Health Committee along party lines. What makes this bill unique is its approach. Rather than allowing private dispensaries to sell cannabis, it proposes a first-of-its-kind state-controlled retail system. The Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board would oversee sales, licensing, and even small consumption lounges, mimicking the existing alcohol model. The bill is broad in scope. It not only allows adults 21 and over to purchase cannabis, but also creates a path for record expungement, allocates tax revenue to social equity programs, and supports small businesses and individuals impacted by the war on drugs. However, it has critics. Republicans object to the rushed process and the unprecedented nature of state-run cannabis sales, which could trigger legal issues under federal law. Even within the Democratic caucus, some lawmakers favor a private market model, arguing it's more practical and inclusive of existing cannabis businesses. Governor Josh Shapiro supports legalization broadly, but hasn't weighed in on the state store model. And while the bill is likely to pass in the Democratic-controlled House, its fate in the Republican-led Senate remains highly uncertain.
Wisconsin's ongoing struggle over cannabis legalization took another turn this week. In a party-line vote, the state's Joint Finance Committee, controlled by Republicans, stripped Governor Tony Evers' marijuana proposal from the biennial state budget. The proposal would have legalized recreational and medical marijuana, imposed excise taxes, allowed home cultivation, and established legal pathways for expunging minor nonviolent cannabis convictions. Governor Evers argued that legalizing and regulating marijuana would help Wisconsin compete economically, reduce justice system burdens, and align with the wishes of over 60% of the state's residents. He also proposed regulating hemp-derived cannabinoids like Delta-8 and Delta-10, and planned to direct cannabis revenue into the state's general fund, with special provisions for tribal revenue sharing. Despite those efforts, Republican lawmakers rejected the plan, citing concerns over spending and overreach. This marks the second time in 2 budget cycles the GOP has blocked marijuana reform, keeping Wisconsin one of the few states in the region with a total prohibition. Lawmakers from both parties acknowledge the debate isn't going away, but as of now, cannabis remains illegal in Wisconsin.
A major new study from Oregon Health and Science University reveals this week that using marijuana during pregnancy can be dangerous for unborn babies. The research, published this week in JAMA Pediatrics, shows higher risks of low birth weight, early delivery, and even infant death. With cannabis use increasing among pregnant women, experts are urging better public health messaging and stronger medical guidance.
This was the State of Cannabis News Digest, available weekly. You can listen to us on all main podcast platforms. To make sure you don't miss out on the latest updates and in-depth analysis of the cannabis industry, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. By subscribing, you'll get notifications for each new episode, helping you stay informed and ahead in the ever-evolving cannabis market. Join us next Saturday for more insights. Until then, keep thriving and stay green.